Welcome everyone to another CTC software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the technical evangelist for the BIM products at CTC, and today we're going to be talking about Shared Parameter Manager. I'd like to go over a comprehensive introduction for you so that you can have a really solid idea of what this tool set can actually do for you. So quickly before we jump in too close, let's just kind of talk about what this tool is all about. I mean, really, those of you who are here are very likely BIM managers, and many of us have way better things to do with our time than like figuring out shared parameter files and tracking down issues and manually merging files in a text editor one at a time. That's just frustrating. And so the built-in out-of-the-box shared parameter management doesn't really do a lot for you. Doesn't let you find files, doesn't let you easily like compare things side by side, doesn't let you rename parameters, and a lot of that stuff are things that we need to do on a regular basis. I also don't have the ability in that out-of-the-box tool to find and replace things, right? So I'm going to show you how Shared Parameter Manager, once you have your shared parameter files internally, once you have the multiple files or even the one that you've got, we're going to talk about how you can manage that shared parameter file set, bring it into one, and really update those parameter names as efficiently as possible. So we're going to cover a couple of things here. We're going to talk about how to access your Shared Parameter Manager once it's installed. We're going to take a look at the interface of Shared Parameter Manager and some of the controls it's got. We're going to actually compare side by side more than one shared parameter file. You need more than one at least to do a comparison, I would suspect, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at parameter naming and how you can update some of that, and we'll take a look at some properties and some of the other functions. And at the very end, in case you don't already have it, I'm going to show you how you can get access to the suite. Now, as always, our webinars are recorded, and as always, if you have questions while I'm talking about this particular tool set, please throw that into the questions window, and I will try to answer those questions as they come up. Since I'm not big on death by PowerPoint, let's go live into Revit and kind of see what this is we're talking about. So first part here, you're in Revit, you're working around. How do you get access to the actual Shared Parameter Manager? Where is it? Where do you find it? Well, it's over here on the CTC Software tab. When you install any of our tools, it'll default to going to the CTC Software tab. And on that tab, if you have the BIM Manager suite installed, the tools that are in blue here, the tool we're going to talk about today is the Shared Parameter Manager. This is the one that lets you work with those shared parameter files. Now, if you don't have this tool, of course, the out-of-the-box way to manage this is to go to the Manage tab in Revit and use the Shared Parameters tool here. The trick about this tool is that once you're in here managing your shared parameters, while you can create a file and you can browse for some other file, you really don't have the ability to show more than one shared parameter file at the same time. And even if you did, you can't really edit anything about the parameters. You can take a look at the properties, but you can't really edit anything. You can move it around and you can make new ones for the actual parameters, or you can delete it and recreate another new one that looks very much the same, obviously with a new GUID, G-U-I-D, but you can't really edit anything about this. And if you were to go to the text file and edit it manually, you actually run a pretty high risk of causing problems in Revit if more than one version of the same shared parameter makes it into a project model. You can actually crash Revit to the desktop with no option to save in a lot of cases. Not all cases, but a lot of cases. And so that can be really dangerous for working with those shared parameter files in a text editor. Not impossible, but it's strongly ill-advised. So we need a safer and more sustainable way to actually work with these shared parameters, because this out-of-the-box tool is very basic. It lets you do the very basic things, but a lot of times, especially as we've improved our BIM workflows in Revit and our experience and kind of culture has grown, the problem is that people tend to introduce additional shared parameter files. They may know some things, maybe they've downloaded something from manufacturers and that makes its way into the system, and we need a better way to manage it. And that is where this Shared Parameter Manager comes into play. It is purpose-built to help you editing your shared parameter files. You can actually completely replace the out-of-the-box shared parameter editing interface with this. Now, the left-hand side of this bottom left portion, is actually very similar to the out-of-the-box tool, but the entirety of the rest of the interface is obviously very different. This right side doesn't exist in the base tool, and this top area up here with some extra options and some extra controls doesn't exist in the base tool either. So let's take a look at what this interface can do before I open up any files. Across the top, of course, there's a basic toolbar here, and one of the really cool powers of this tool is the ability for you to harvest, to export shared parameters from either an active project model or the project and the families that are loaded into that project file. So I know some people have asked the question in the past, like, hey, Sean, if I have a bunch of families and I don't know what shared parameter file they came from, or I don't have it at all, maybe it got deleted, how can I recover from that? Well, as long as those families are in a project and your project itself maybe has some parameters, if they're shared parameters, you can harvest that out to a unique new shared parameter file. I wouldn't officially use that file moving forward. I would build my own, but this is a way where you can actually get access to those parameters. You can also configure some default parameter groups inside of here for figuring out how things group together. There's some defaults you can work with there. There's the ability for you to manage your main primary shared parameter file and compare it to another one. That's this first tab right here. And there's the ability to also use the shared parameter manager to create loaded parameter sets for bringing into a project environment. I know contractors really enjoy this portion of a tool for their data properties. They're constantly getting updated models from outside sources. They don't own the original model, and they need the ability to push some project parameters in, and they want to do it in a consistent, efficient way. This tool can help you with that process. And it can actually be sort of templated, so to speak, because I can actually create predefined selection sets, and those selection sets actually save right next to my main shared parameter file. So it makes it real easy for you to define what categories and where things are supposed to be grouped and instance versus type settings and all that stuff for any number of parameters you're going to bring directly into your project. Now, this is loading in shared parameters as project parameters very specifically. If you wanted to do family type work, then that's a different tool with Family Processor. But we're talking here about shared parameters primarily today and how you can use this to manage your shared parameter file in general. So we're going to cover this tab the most. So let's talk about if you were doing a brand new shared parameter file, what that would look like. Well, just like the out-of-the-box tool, you can click New. So I'll click New here, and I can give myself a brand new name. Let's say I call this Webinar Shared Parameters, and I can save that. You can see I have a lot of shared parameter files here. Ideally, you would have one shared parameter file. There are some exceptions to that, but the whole ideal here is that there's one source of truth, one data foundation for your entire firm, one shared parameter file. Me making yet another one kind of breaks that rule, but you know, this webinar is showing you how you can do some things. So if I save this shared parameter file, one of the very first things you have to do in a shared parameter file is make at least one group. I recommend making all of the groups that you can actually use out of the box in Revit. Things like identity data, text, graphics, dimensions, other, things like that. Now, in the out-of-the-box tool, you can add groups one at a time. Here, I can actually add an entire list of groups that I want to be generated, and it'll generate them quickly. So if I wanted to make my own, like, graphics, and then I can hit enter here, and maybe I want to add identity data, right? I can do that manually if I really want to. I don't like doing that manually. In fact, what I like to do is hit the Add Default Groups button, and it'll give me all of the default groups where I can actually place parameters in the family and project editor environment. I'm going to click OK here, and it gives me a big old list of groups that I can work with. Okay. Now, within these groups, I can start adding my own parameters directly. And the nice thing here is that I can actually add as many as I'd like of the same data types. I'm not doing one by one by one, right? Add width, come back and add again, add length, come back and add another one, add, height, right? I can batch add here and put in height, enter, length, width, thickness, and I don't know what else, depth, whatever, right? And so I can add all these to my list, and I can create them all as length parameters very quickly. Makes it real easy. Oh, look at that. I misspelled something. That always happens to me. I always fat finger when I'm typing a bunch of things out. I don't know why that is, but it just happens. Now in Revit, natively, I would have to delete this parameter to fix that name. Here, I don't have to do that. I can simply double click on thickness to edit it, or I can select it and then click modify over here. And when I'm modifying this, I can fix the name, thickness, and spell it correctly this time. And check this out. If there was an incorrect data type, I can even fix that. I can fix what group it's in, change the visibility settings or user modifiable, or add a tooltip to my parameters. All of these are properties of parameters, shared parameters, but really, after you create them, you have no way of re-accessing this stuff. In fact, visible is not visible anywhere in the Revit default user interface. You have to manually edit the text file to update this property on shared parameters. And that's kind of frustrating. Well, here I actually have access to all of it, so I can fix this. Now, whenever you make a major change, except for group and the visible and the user modifiable and the tooltip, so basically if you change the name or if you change the parameter type, it's going to prompt you here about the GUID being updated. That's important because it's going to assign a new global unique identifier. That's what GUID stands for, new global unique identifier, to this parameter. The name is changing or the data type is changing. That's important. So I can fix that. Now, I know that when I have been going through the exercise of making a bunch of parameters, especially early on, or maybe I'm dealing with a bunch of parameters that have been in my shared parameter file for a while, and now that Autodesk has updated some of the units of measure, maybe I want to fix some things. I know that out of the box, a lot of electrical content by default, so let's use the electrical example here, has a voltage property. And now in this, there's, where is it? Electrical potential is actually the data type for this. So if I was going to make voltage today, I would make it this way. But out of the box, the way that it's made for a lot of content and the way that many of us in the past have added these was to use the common text parameter right here. And so if I make a parameter called voltage right here, and I create that, well, it's made, that's in the wrong group. Let's put this into electrical stuff. And by the way, I can just drag and drop between groups in here also, which is fantastic for organizing your shared parameter file. But if I go edit voltage here, just like with the name that I modified for thickness, I can go here to my discipline and say, you know what, you're going to be electrical. I'm going to correct this and call it electrical potential, and I'm going to click OK here. And that's going to update this. And of course, the GUID is going to change. This makes me a brand new parameter. Looks like the same name, but obviously the data type is massively different, and that's going to change what kind of data Revit can actually hold. So it has to make a brand new GUID for this. I can answer yes to that, and it means I didn't have to delete the parameter and come back and re-add that parameter. Now here's a really important note. If you start making changes here, every single family and schedule and tag that you've already made based on the old parameter definition, you will have to go through that content and you will have to fix it because it's no longer compatible with the new shared parameter. So all new content built off this new shared parameter will be not working with your old schedules and your old tags, and your old content won't work with your new schedules and new content and new tags that you make based on this new parameter, right? So they're incompatible. They're two different things. So you can think of a shared parameter like a recipe in a recipe book. You can think of a shared parameter file like the actual book or box the recipes are stored in, right? When you're using that parameter in the first place to create the parameter definition in a family or a schedule or something like that, you only need that recipe while you're making it. Later, if this entire file gets deleted, you know what? It is what it is. It's deleted, but that component that was made has already been made. It doesn't need the recipe after that creation point. So what this means, though, is that if you have an entire library of content based on the old voltage, based on text, you will have to go hand touch that content to fix it and to update it to make it correct. Revit doesn't magically know what you want to do there in those other files. So you will have to make some changes there. That said, I do have tools that can help you with this, right? I've got a tool specially designed for helping you do shared parameter management, but also a tool specially designed for helping you fix your families and fix your schedules that are in your projects, right? So there is an entire collection of tools. Don't be afraid that you can't do it. You can change your mind on a parameter standard and implement that in a very short amount of time. All right, we've got this shared parameter file, but let's talk about what happens when we have a really, fully established shared parameter file, and now these other ones have crept into our system. How do we strategically manage that, right? So I'm going to first off browse for the old shared parameter file that I have here. This old shared parameter file. I'm going to open this one up. And this has a bunch of old stuff in it, right? Like if I expand this out, this has some old names. Like I don't use mathematical characters in my names anymore. I don't like using dots in my names. Can I? Sure. Do I like to do that? Not at all, because it screws with my formulas and it makes things read a little more difficultly. It's more difficult to read them. So instead of doing things like this, I like to find these in my shared parameter file and I like to clean them up. And there's actually a way that I can do that very easily. There's a filter up here on the top right where I can say, find me what might be considered naming issues. Now, they might not all be actually naming issues. It's going to do a best guess for me, and it'll highlight them in the system with yellow. And I can even isolate those. I can say show only the naming issues, and then I can start to rip through these and figure out what's going on inside this system. A good example of a naming issue here is actually these guys. There's a bunch of these frame depth, frame thicknesses, panel depth, panel width, where there's no spaces in my name. This one here, do not use annotation scale, not actually a naming issue. It highlights it because the N in not is lowercase, and this thing likes to have title case type names. So same thing here, blower wheel diameter and width. Well, that's fine because you know what, it's actually an okay name. But some of these are actually problematic and I might want to handle those. So with these selected parameters right here, I can actually do a find and replace. So instead of needing to double click on each one individually and fix each one by one, I can do a find and replace, and I can say, you know what, find frame and replace it with frame space, right? Or I could say instead maybe find depth and replace it with space depth space. And I can preview that change, and it'll say, oh, well, look at this. There's frame depth 1, frame depth 2, 3, panel depth 1, panel depth 2, and it corrects the names because it puts a space before and after the word depth. In this case, it was a really easy correction, and I can apply that change back to my project. Now, maybe, and if 5 parameters were renamed, I didn't show you the warning there. We'll take a look at this in a minute here. Let's do thickness. Let's find thickness and replace that with, well, I'll do the whole thing here, space, thickness space. If I could spell THICKNESS, that's better. Preview that change. And then, so it's going to do, again, frame thickness where there wasn't a space, just for the ones that I highlighted, because there's thickness elsewhere in this list, I'm sure. This is just doing the ones that I highlighted in this case, because it says apply to selected shared parameters, as opposed to my entire shared parameter file in this case. But when I apply these changes, a message pops up and it tells me a new GUID is going to be assigned to all of these shared parameters that I have here. Do I want to continue? And I'm going to answer yes, of course, because I want that to update those, and then those will be renamed as well. I didn't handle width here. I could. I'm going to choose not to in this case. You've already seen that rename process here. But if I now come back and say naming issues and only show me naming issues, just refresh that filter, as I scroll down into dimensions, you'll notice that those like 9 dimensions or 8 dimensions that I had fixed are now gone, right? They're no longer here. And so this file right here, I renamed one of them to old. I actually made my own side copy of this, but I want to show you what happens here. If I browse out again, oh, hang on. Let's cancel that. Let me do a Windows Explorer window here, and let's go find, here it is, it's right there. It's right in front of me. There's my old shared parameter file. This is the original of that shared parameter file. I'm not touching this one in today's example. I'm actually touching this one directly, but I wanted to point this out because in a minute here, I'm going to save this, and I want you to see exactly what happens in this area with this shared parameter file. I did see a question pop up that asked, is it wise to do this side copy? Sure, Why not? Just make sure you know which one it is, because once you're done editing this, you want to delete the original. You want to have ultimately one, not like 85,000 different copies of what should be there, because then things get confusing. I actually confused myself before this webinar today, because I had like 18 different copies of this because I do a lot of demos, and I couldn't remember exactly which one I was supposed to use. So I had to reset my demo set a bit so I could show you this. But you know, this copy right here I did make just so I had an old example, a prefixed example of the one that I usually use in most of the rest of my data set. So when I save this, it successfully saved it. Good for that. Now, if I browse again, notice how it put a .2 after this? You know how Revit does its .000 whatever backups? This is doing effectively the exact same thing. When I made my original webinar shared parameters today in front of you and saved it, and then I made some modifications and saved it again, here's the backup. This is actually the original save from when I made it, and this is the latest and greatest edition. This is the original from when I opened it up, and this is the now saved most recent version that Revit could be referencing, right? It was saved as of today. So do you need to make yourself a backup? No, you don't. You don't need to do that. You just need to make sure that the file exists. Now, if you're using a project up on BIM 360, doesn't matter. You can still leverage the export shared parameters because it has to be opened up into Revit anyway. And your shared parameters file, well, it can't be up on BIM 360 regardless, because Revit doesn't even know how to reference a shared parameter file up on BIM 360. It itself can't reference its own cloud shared system. So you may as well just keep it on your local network someplace and keep editing it from there. So don't put this up on BIM 360 because Revit doesn't know how to use that. It needs to stay on your local system. Just kind of an idea of like where this should be saved. In my case, it's on my C drive. That's probably not a good place for a company standard, but it sure does keep other people's fingers off my shared parameter file. Okay, let's get back to the main thing at task here. I want to turn off this filter about naming issues, and I want to talk about one other concept. I have a lot of companies come to me and say, hey, Sean, I really want to prefix all of my shared parameters with my company's initials. I want to throw an idea out there that you don't want to do that, but if you really think you do, I actually have a way of doing prefixing and suffixing. Prefix with like CTC underscore for all my selected parameters. It's going to change every one of those GUIDs. Everyone's going to get a new GUID because my name changes, but it will rename all those parameters to CTC underscore. Now, if you realize that maybe Sean's recommendation today of not doing that was correct and you have this and you wanted to get rid of it, you can also use the find replace for this step. Find CTC underscore and replace it with nothing. When I preview that change, it's going to strip the CTC underscore from those parameters. Now I can apply that and I go back to the normal naming. Of course, it's not going to reset my GUIDs back to what they were at this point. I've already made the change. I'd have to cancel out of this without saving and then reopen up the file before I added the CTC prefix if I wanted the original GUIDs. You'll never get the original GUID back. But you can strip your prefix or suffix from this away if you want to, and then it's going to go ahead and make those changes. So now it's back to what it was before. So you have that as an ability. By the way, to kind of clarify, like, why don't I recommend putting initials as prefixes? This is why. The family processor up here, this extra tool that you can use to go through all of your content and fix all of it to make it your shared parameter. One of the things that this will also do is when you get other outside content in the future and you go, oh, hey, look, here's a parameter that's called panel width, right? Everybody in industry in English typically calls it panel width, or maybe it's door width, whatever, but it's common language, right? Nobody's going to call it CTC underscore panel width. So if I prefix all of my corporate parameters with CTC underscore, the problem is that every time I go into Family Processor, I will have to manually browse to my parameters, and it will be no easy way for me to get to P for panel width because the first 4 characters is CTC underscore. Could you suffix with it? Sure, you could suffix with it, But the problem there is you still have to manually browse in this tool every single parameter for the rest of time, always. There will be no automatic help when there's common names used on parameters. Yeah, but I want to know if it's my parameter. Look, if you place it in your project and it works, it's your parameter. If you place it in your project and it doesn't work, it's obviously not your parameter, and you can use the family processor to fix it. So that's kind of like one of the things, when you're here using a tool set and you're trying to be as efficient as a BIM manager as you possibly can, right? Have one shared parameter file. Try to use common naming on your parameters, and don't get overly creative. It's just going to save you time in the long run. They're data types. That's the important piece, right? You need to have those proper bits of data. Okay, next step here in the shared parameter manager. I told you I was going to do this. I'm going to compare two files side by side. So I'm going to browse for some other shared parameter file that may have made its way into my system. In fact, let's take a look at the webinar shared parameters that I made earlier today. Right? We've got some things in here like depth, height, length, thickness, width. There's a voltage property here. They look very much the same potentially as parameters that are in my other shared parameter file. The problem is, despite them looking the same, despite them being made identically, they are the identical shared parameter as far as my eyes see. Revit doesn't see them as the same. In fact, I can have this thing show me conflicting parameters, and I can isolate those. There's already a depth, height, length, thickness, and width and voltage in my shared parameter file. And they're not the same as the ones over here. So any content based on this is incompatible with content based on this. The nice thing is I now know that in my library there might be a bunch of these conflicts, and I can add depth to my list of things to fix. And if it finds depth, it'll auto swap it to my depth. Don't have to map anything if I'm using the family processor tool that's also in the manager suite. So that's one way of finding these things. Now, if I was like, well, I think most of my content was based on this parameter file on the right side, and I want to keep this stuff and replace what's on the left, well, it's easy. I can simply delete the things here on the left, and then I could drag and drop between the two. Let me give a better example of that. I'm going to browse for another shared parameter file, my SuperDoor shared parameter file right here. This has a bunch of parameters in it. In fact, this one even has some things that are the same, right? Somebody maybe took a copy of one of these files and then further manipulated it. But some stuff is the same, some stuff is so duplicated, some stuff is conflicting, and some stuff is actually unique on this right side. So I get to make some decisions about how I want to handle this stuff. Well, if there's things that are duplicate, that means that probably most of my library is consistent with these things. But if something is unique, and since this is my, was looking for conflict, if there's conflicting stuff, maybe this is what the vast majority of my doors library is based on, and this stuff isn't what it's based on. So maybe I want to get rid of the stuff on the left. So I'm going to highlight all of these parameters, deselect my groups because I want to keep those, and I'm going to delete the stuff on the left in my organization's main, theoretically, shared parameter file. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Now, existing as well. I missed that one. We'll delete that one as well. On the right side now, I can say, show me things that are unique. And now all of those parameters are unique. There's still a couple that are duplicated, and that's fine. I don't care about those. But the ones that are unique now, I actually want to handle this in some form. So how can I handle this? Well, I've got these parameters here in identity data, and I want them in my real shared parameter file. So I'm going to take and highlight all those and drag them across here into identity data. They're no longer unique. They're now duplicates, so they disappear from this list. It makes it real easy for me to see what I've handled and what I haven't handled. Materials and finishes. These all should go into materials and finishes, wherever that is in my list. I can collapse this again. My other parameters here probably all want to go into others. I can drag and drop that over there, right? This is super simple. Phasing. I'm going to take existing and drop it into phasing down here. So now everything that's in that file is duplicate. I've handled the whole thing. There are no conflicts. There's nothing unique. I've gone through and visually inspected the file, and I can now handle all of the stuff. My shared parameter manager has helped me do this, and of course I can save my master shared parameter file And when I do that, I would delete this other rogue file so it never accidentally gets used again. I don't want people to continue to work with this. I would delete it off the network. I would, completely banish it from the system. It's gone because I've already incorporated it into my real corporate shared parameter file. That's the major strategy here with the shared parameter manager. Okay. All right, let's see here. I'm going to save this for now. I'm going to browse to a different shared parameter file and show you one other thing that this shared parameter tool can do for me. In the load shared parameters area right here, if I have a shared parameter file and I have already preset up some things that maybe I want to bring into a project environment, like in this case, I told my angle and my length parameters to be able to come across whenever I'm dealing with this BIM Plan 2019 group. And I've also got standard project parameters in my list, and it knows about department and remark and wall-based material. So you can simply make a new selection set of parameters, and then you can drag parameters from the left side into this little middle box. These are parameters that will be added to my project. And then once I've done that, I can select a parameter or a couple of parameters here, and I can choose which categories they're going to go to. I can choose how they're going to be grouped in my project and if it's instance or type. So this department parameter and this maybe the remark parameter, yeah, they're both associated to sheets here in this case. They're both, common text. They're both going into identity data, and they're instance parameters. Great, right? My wall-based material here is probably not going to sheets. Yeah, it's going to walls, and it's going to be a part of materials and finishes, again, as an instance parameter. But this is all preset. So the next time I want to bring these 3 parameters into my project, all I have to do is choose that group and just say load parameters, and I'm done. I don't have to manually choose those settings again in the next project. Or if I wanted these, BIM Plan 2019 properties here with length and angle, it doesn't matter what their settings are. I just grab the group that I want because I've made a new group. I've added my parameters and chosen once what all my settings are going to be. And once I've done all that, when I click load parameters, it just brings them in. And it saves me a lot of headache if I have to do this process repeatedly on projects that I receive from the outside, or if I need to update a lot of my active projects on a repetitive type basis. This helps me do that. So that's kind of a massive tour here of the shared parameter manager, right? We open up files, we can browse, we can rename, correct stuff, compare files side by side, even build selection sets for putting project parameters from our shared parameter file into our project. So after we've talked about all of that, if you don't have it already, you might want to know how you can get your hands on it. Well, this is how you get your hands on it. If you go to the CTC software website, ctcsoftware.com right here. On ctcsoftware.com, if you go to products and you go to the BIM Manager suite for 2021, this will, when it installs, by the way, I didn't mention this earlier, when this installs, this BIM Manager suite will work 2017 through Revit 2021. But you can try this free for 14 days. And you can also contact us, try to buy it here if you want to, contact us for some pricing, learn more about it. Each of the tools themselves, they've got, of course, videos in here. So if there's more about this particular suite you want, check it out. But you can certainly try it free and do those things that I was mentioning today in the Revit environment directly inside of the BIM or the Shared Parameter Manager. I want to thank you for the time that you've given me today. We always appreciate when you show up live and interact with us on our webinars, and we look forward to seeing you in some of the future webinars we have coming up.